board so we can get started here. Well, hey everyone, it's fun to see you all. I think we've kind of have a regular group now, so it's great to see you guys coming back and wanting to chat some more. So I'll do just a quick recount, so just some housekeeping stuff. As you know, we are to the midpoint of our quarter, which is, it's shocking every time, isn't it, Laura? I mean, you've done this now, we've all done this for a while, and it's still, these quick quarters are just amazing. So our 11-week sprint. So I wanted to let you know a couple things that I did and mentioned. I changed the journal assignment slightly. And so you may have seen the directions that I gave, but just kind of to reiterate, Laura and I have really appreciated your forums. You've done some really good work, good reflection. We get a sense of what's going on in the course because of how you're reflecting on the practices, which are a critical part of the course. But we recognize that we also wanted you to have some interaction outside of the live chat, which is really just us, on any of the content you are reading or watching. And so, and a big reason I want to do this is because that will be what your final paper is all about, is taking some of what you're reading and watching and formulating it into to comment on a case study that you'll create. And so I wanted you all to get into the practice now of doing that so that you won't be shocked when it hits on the 10th week of the quarter. And well, hopefully you're going to write your paper before that, but when it hits towards the end of the quarter. And so that's all I'm asking. It's a pretty easy prompt. So again, it's the same amount of words for that Thursday at midnight prompt. So none of the word count has shifted. But I am going to ask you first to talk about the weekly practice. So it's the same kind of thing you've been doing. I shortened the prompt, but it's the same one. And then the second part is your weekly content. And it says this: reflect on one concept you read or watched from our course material this week. What connections are you making with this material? Second part, how might this concept or idea contribute to your understanding of God's calling for you? That's one part you could answer about that particular concept you picked. Or how might this concept or idea help you navigate similar situations differently in the future? And that one speaks the most directly to what you'll be doing in your final paper. So if you want to start now and starting to build some of those concepts, linking some things together, this is the place to do it. And then when you comment back on your two colleagues by Sunday night, you can comment on either or both. So you can comment on what they said about the practice. You can comment about what they said about their particular concept, just as long as you are kind of coming back and talking about something that they posted. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is I'm going to allow you to upload a video if you'd like. So trying to kind of let people be more creative in their expressions. So if you prefer not to do the post, which is 150 to 200 words on Thursday, you can post under a 3-minute video. Please spare. I mean, I know I'm wordy, and so I know that I could probably just go on. So knowing that we're all watching these videos, try to stay under 3 minutes if possible. I mean, you don't have to cut yourself off, but so a 3-minute video, and in that video you can answer both of those prompts, so both the journal and something that you found in the reading that's interesting. And the same can go for your responses. Instead of doing the 100-word response to 2 of your colleagues, you can also just do a video under 2 minutes. So just kind of attempts to get more online interaction going, and we get to see each other more, which is fun. So that is that piece. Let me just pause there. I just said a lot. Are there any questions about that small shift? Okay.
Nope.
Clear.
Clear.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So another couple things I said, I'd love to be able to meet with you all individually or in groups. Now, you all on this call have more or less fulfilled this already. And so I'm happy to meet with you again, but consider that you've checked this box, you've met with your professor because we're meeting weekly. But all of you out there who are watching this video, I would like to have some time either individually or check in as a group, and I'm going to send around a sign up form. The point is to get to know you better, to see if you have any questions about the class. And one of the things that the formation groups and Laura and I are hoping you all are also thinking about in addition to the final paper is, what steps do I need to take beyond this class? Are there particular ways I need to think about my own self-care, my own vocational identity, maybe getting a coach or a spiritual director or a therapist? So we want to be people with whom you can talk to if that's something you'd like to pursue. So that's that. This week you have your second formation group meetings, and I'm assuming that you all will have already received or will be receiving soon your emails. So it'll be the same kind of setup. Laura and I have had chances to interact with the formation group leaders, and they have only positive things to say. It's been a really, they're happy and glad to be engaged, and really glad that you all have engaged in these groups. So, so I hope that that's enjoyable again for you this week. Last thing I'll say is, you'll probably notice that the practices that we're doing, the weekly practices, they're building on one another, right? So we kind of started small with your breath, and then we moved to meditation. We're doing mindfulness and meditative prayer this week. We're gonna continue to build on things, and they'll move into things like creation care and going on an AWE, awe walk. We're gonna do a sleep hygiene practice, which quite honestly is the hardest for students, and perhaps us as well, the others who are helping with this course. So I wouldn't throw sleep hygiene at you first. So notice that each week we're just kind of building these muscles, this capacity to take on weekly practices. So just know that we're kind of moving away from some of those more meditative mindfulness practices and moving into some different pieces in the next few weeks. Okay, that is my laundry list. Are there any questions about the assignments? We'll get into the content here in a second, but anything about assignments, practices, due dates, anything like that?
Are you opposed to meeting one-on-one, even though we've met you in this group?
I am not opposed. I am for. I am
Okay.
pro that idea. I just didn't want you to assume that you've done the minimum, but I would be happy to meet with you even more. That would be great.
Yeah, no, I just, you know, sometimes there's a rabbit hole, and it's fun to pursue, maybe singularly, but not drag the whole group down into the rabbit hole with you.
I would be glad to go down the rabbit hole. That sounds interesting. So for sure.
Very
Thanks,
good.
Karen.
Yeah.
Other questions? Sorry, there's like a little slice of sunlight that, okay, here we go. Anything else? It's airtight. Okay. Laura, from your perspective, is there anything that I'm missing in terms of course and what we're doing? Okay, 2 thumbs up, great. Okay, so let's move into the fun stuff, which is the content. This week we've been talking about extended community. So embodied cognition to extended cognition. We talked about trauma, and now we're doing extended community. So you heard from Dr. Abernethy, you heard from Dr. Brown and Strawn, lots of different things, different places we could go. I have a few questions here, but I'd rather hear from you, either a question you have, or maybe just something that stood out to you that's interesting that you'd like for us to talk about.
I'm finding someone had to talk. And I'd leave early, so I guess I should get out now. I'm finding how surprisingly integrated this classes with some other classes another class I'm taking now. Surprisingly, music and theology, you would not think. But just the whole thing about, how music and the worship, and then, supersizing and everything, dualism versus all that is being discussed. Oh, and they use the term embodiment in the music and theology class. So I'm just kind of so surprised at how this is flowing into some other classes, which I'm sure that makes you feel good, but I just did not expect it, because I'm writing notes for, this class for the final paper, but also for the other class. As I go along, I go, music and theology discussion week number 6 or whatever, I'm circling, and there's a lot in there that is really useful. If you're a music, worship leader that we're studying, that it just all flows in.
That's so great. I love that, Paul. I planned it. No, I didn't plan it. But I'm so glad that you're making these connections. I mean, that's our hope, right? In all of these courses, is that there's ways that you're pulling in concepts to have conversation with one another. So Dr. Alexis Abernathy talked about, I mean, she does a lot of work with spirituality and health, but specifically worship. She's the chief academic officer at Fuller. Jesus planned it. So that was just sorry, there was a chat that said, who planned it? So Dr. Abernathy is also the chief academic officer. And so our meeting that we just had, honestly, it's kind of a boring meeting. It's just like stuff to do with the operations at Fuller. She plays this worship song in the beginning to bring us together. From her church, she goes to, I believe it's a Black Baptist church, I believe, downtown, and it was stunning, and it put us all in a very different place. It's 8 a.m. right? So we're having this 2-hour meeting, 8 a.m. on the operations at Fuller, and I mean to tell you, it shifted our cognition. It shifted the ways that we engaged with one another. And truly a part of it was that she extended it as a part of herself. And so it was like we were experiencing Dr. Abernathy's spirituality, and it was just lovely. So I'm curious, Paul, what have you noticed? Like, what you've mentioned some words like embodiments and dualism, but what kind of concept have you found is really sticking out from both of these courses that you're in?
I think the biggest concept, which is the controversy that you read in the what's the title of book, Enlightened Christianity, I think, is that the title, Brown and Strawn?
Enhancing Christian Life.
Enhancing Christian Life. The dualism, spirituality versus the church as a community. And you cannot, one of the quotes in the book is something like, you can't be a Christian unless it's a community, and that whole concept, and you have this controversy within both the Protestant churches, but also non-denominational. Is this supposed to be about you? And when you're selecting music, when we look at contemporary music today, a lot of it is I, me. Those are the words that are used. Those are the pronouns. When it really should be we and us, because that is what Paul talks about in all his letters, is the church is a community. It's not me alone. It's 2 or more who gather in my name. And we get strength from being part of a community. So that's one of the biggest things I'm really getting from the readings, is this strength. It just reinforces, I think, what we have read in the Bible, but from a psychological standpoint. Why Paul may have said that. Without all the studies, it just was obvious to him.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Paul. Other thoughts on that?
The book is resonating, enhancing Christian life, and along with a video for this week as well. The guys were talking about Zoom church and getting back to live, and then in the book, and I'm gonna screw up exactly where it is in the book. I want to say it's in the last third, but they're talking about sort of not just cognitive extension, but again, the community aspect of it. And when you corporately pray, when you corporately sing, when you corporately worship, etc. And, kind of pulling all that together as, our ministry team, along with probably every other ministry team on the planet, is sort of struggling, right, with how to get folks off of their sofas, watching live stream church and back in. And it's a really, as much as I dig the concept, I'm also thinking at the same time, like, oh yeah, that's going to resonate, extended cognition. And you know what I mean? That's one you can really take to the membership, about why they should come back into church, right? Meanwhile, we're pretty much just resorting to the basics, like food, like, hey, come here for the food. And ironically, it kind of always works. But what I find, I think, really interesting about it too is sort of this struggle we have, between our devices, and how that sort of cognitively extends us, and that we'd like you to put your phone away during church, and but then we have you on a Zoom call, which essentially forces your computer as an extended cognitive device. And then I remember this one time I went to this worship service where the pastor loaded his sermon onto YouVersion. And there's a tool within YouVersion that allows you to follow on your phone. So if you zone out, which inevitably you will, right? Because and but you can quickly get back on track because the whole sermon is right there on your phone with these big, bold, points that he wants to make in the sermon, and then smaller points and etc. in which Bible verse he's using. And I admit that I know it's a quagmire, but I feel like we really struggle, with the technology of the day, and when to use it, how to use it effectively, but yet retain that community, right? Because everybody's sitting in their own living room on their sofa. I agree with the video and the book in saying that's really not, how did they place it? That's really not using the tool. Like, it's, you can carry the hammer around all day, but it's not really an extension of yourself until you start nailing using the hammer to nail something into place. And then it becomes, a tool that you're using. So I'm really jumping around here. I'm sorry. So I'm just going to stop.
That's great, Karen. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of great parts there that we can dig into. Colin, I saw you unmute. Did you want to say something as well?
Just briefly, I think it was Dr. Abernathy she was talking about they're doing studies that correlate like corporate worship with like emotional well-being. And that really resonated with me because I don't know exactly how to explain it, but something about being in the same room with people worshiping is like really cleansing and healing for me. And so I've noticed over the course of the last couple of years that it's just not the same at home watching on my computer. And luckily, things up here are more open now than they probably ever have been. And so I've been able to go back to church. So I just, I appreciated the perspective that she was bringing about the research that they're doing about how, worshiping corporately and praying corporately and all of those things, there's a correlation there to, wellness and well-being. And I certainly feel like I have some experience with that.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. And interestingly enough, I think intuitively I would have said, sure, okay, there's something about being in a corporate worshiping body that brings well-being. But when she said that it was the sermon that actually was important at times for bringing about transformation, that just went against everything that I think is true. Because it seems to be, right, if on face value, it can seem to be the opposite of embodiment, because you're sitting and you're listening. But I think as she continued to explain it, the sermon was about forgiveness. So in a sense, the pastor is extending the pastor's, his or her ability to understand forgiveness into the congregation. The congregation is receiving that. The person is then going back home, processing it, and then does something with it. So it doesn't become this me, mine, individual practice. It becomes something that is transformative, because that person went home, I think in the story, and forgave their mother for something that they had been unable to do. So that turned my assumptions over, because I think I dismiss sermons often as not being transformative, but so it was really interesting to see that connection there. So lots of great points here. If I can kind of back us up to go back to this mind-body dualism, because I think that's been a big piece of what we've been thinking about this week. It really is kind of this centuries-long conversation that we get to enter into. And I think, if we think about the nation of Israel, if you read about Jewish thought, you don't find that there's a lot of disconnection between body and soul, right? That wasn't, as if you read some of the Jewish thinkers, that's not particularly how they would consider how we are created as human. So where did that come from? I mean, you can trace that through, but we know as people who are USers who are in the West, that we have this particular individualism that gets put on top of how we think about what it means to be human. And then our denominations or traditions potentially shape us as well. So that we come through thinking, and this was me growing up, like that the body and the soul are different. And some people have kind of this tripartite, like body, soul, spirit, right? But however you think about it, if it's separated in that way, I think part of what we need to think about is like, how does that then shape us and guide us in the ways that go all the way down to, Karen, the very thing you're thinking, which is like, how do we care for people and the food that they need to eat, right? So it feels like way philosophical, but if you actually think about how we're shaped by that kind of thinking, and I'm not saying be a monist or be a dualist, but I'm just saying, if we think about how we talk about the body and the spirit, body and the soul, that actually affects our theology, our ecclesiology, the way we do pastoring in the church and in other places. I know for me, Dallas Willard, you guys know the author Dallas Willard. I mean, I read a lot of his stuff, and that has really informed how I think about spirituality. But now when I go back and read some of his work, it is often about your interior life with God. And I think there may be some things missing that I just didn't realize about how we think about the body, and that the body isn't bad, but it's actually a way we take in knowledge. It's the way that we extend ourselves to others. So I think it's important for us to think about kind of what disconnections do we have if we think about dualism, potentially what suspicions does that bring up for us? Because if we have dualism, we're probably favoring one over the other, perhaps pushing one away, bringing another one close. And so, in what ways are we minimizing the body? Even in the way that we do ministry, if we've ministered to that person's mind, but not their body, not the whole of who they are, then have we missed something? So I just said a lot there. Any thoughts or responses to that?
I'll go real quick because unfortunately I have to go. It is together, because if you have someone that physically is hurting, You have to take care of that. Otherwise, then you can't get into their mind because they're just struggling to survive. So they are integrated, and which one you focus on is just going to depend on the situation, what they need. But the body is very important. You can't ignore it and just say we're spiritual. You can't ignore your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good word, Paul. Paul, thank you for joining us. I know you need to sneak off to your meeting. Great to see you. Other thoughts in this direction? So yeah, go ahead, Karen.
I have a question for you. I don't know whether you consider yourself introverted or extroverted, and maybe that's a little bit passé as well. But I think that as a introverted person in an extroverted world, I think that I do underscore community, or did for quite some time until recently. And the more I read, especially even this quarter, about just community and extension, et cetera. I'm not sure that I understand the dualism, trap, if you will, and I think that what you said resonates with me, where you can't serve two masters, right? You're probably doing one more than, using or leveraging one more than another. But I think that, my question is somewhat, and a little bit around what Dr. Abernathy was saying too, is with the science of it, can't we use a little bit of simplicity sometimes too, and say that it's never an all or nothing. You can't say that it's all, you could go with Dallas Willard and say, it is a lot of internal, relationship, but, it's also, a balance, and you have to figure out that balance, that percentage for yourself, what kind of is the formula that,
Sure.
sort of supports your, supports the best, service, for God's mission for the world, as well as your own, growth and health. I don't know.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I'll take a little stab at it and then I'll open it up to others. But as I understand the ways that we talk about extended cognition, extended community, it has more to do with how we think and how we think outside of ourselves. And so I could argue that even if I'm me, myself, and alone here reading my Bible and journaling, I learned that from someone. There was someone in my past with whom I had this extended, which, kind of this relational connection that I'm now recalling, that's helping me in my individual practice. So I think more of what Strawn and Brown are saying is that we don't become Christians in a vacuum, right? That even if we're not in front of a person worshiping with them alongside of us, we're still, bless you, bringing people along with us. And we're reenacting, we're mimicking, we're thinking with. So I'm journaling, I'm remembering my Linda in college, who taught me how to do journaling as a practice, even though I'm an extrovert. But I don't know, I'm in the middle-ish somewhere, I don't know. Getting a PhD made me become more introverted, forced me. So, and the pandemic, so I don't really know who I am now. I'm just confused. But that person helped me, extended their, themselves to me in a way that I'm always pulling in other people. I think that's more of their point. So it's less like, look, introverts, you can never be alone again. You always must be in the presence of people and in the room in order to become a Christian. I don't think that's it, but I do think that we can fall into this trap of, my internal practices become just reinforcing my own well-being. And I think their point, what Dr. Strawn said in the video, was how it's evidenced is the fruit of the spirit. Like, how is it that the things that we are sowing internally are then turning us outward into community. And I think extroverts and introverts can show fruits of the spirit in different ways. So I don't know. Thoughts, anybody?
I have no additional thoughts.
Yeah. You know, it's provocative to say, you know, I'm not a Christian alone. I don't image God alone. I image God with others. I don't grow as a Christian alone. I grow with others. I mean, and I think there's some kind of corrective. I mean, I think I said this last time we spoke last week, but this book was written particularly towards evangelicals in the Western church, Western world. And so I think what they're doing is they're correcting for this very private spirituality. Now we can have a personal spirituality. I think that that's legit, right? But our spirituality is never private. It's not mine alone, because we are connected to others. We have been connected to others. We are connected to others. We will be connected to others. That's what the body is about. And so I did think, and I wonder what you guys thought about this in the video. They ask, like, why do people go to church? Like, why do we go to church any longer? And, you know, I thought about my reason for that. And I was like, oh, like, I'm not sure I would connect it to, I long to be formed in a community of believers who themselves are being formed towards the image of Christ for the sake of the world. I mean, I could get there. I got there just now. But I think in the moment, I would probably say, like, yeah, I just like being around some of my friends, and I love worship, and I want to hear the word of God, you know. So I think it speaks to all of us as to, like, what do we think we're doing in church? Why church, you know?
Yeah, I think that the adjective they used was puny, right? That most of the responses would be fairly puny. And I'm like, well, I think that mine might be puny as well. And then I thought, well, perhaps, you know, shame on me that I don't, you know, have a little bit better of a response, because I think that individually I have a great response as to why I believe and what I think, you know, the purpose God has given Jesus followers. But if you ask me how that translates into, yeah, but why go to church? Then it's funny that I fail to have a very deep response on it. But yours was great.
Well, I'm telling you that that's my aspirational answer and not necessarily what comes to mind if you would have just asked me off the cuff. So, yeah. Laura, go ahead.
I think that's the question millennials and Gen Zs are asking. And when people are saying there are fewer and fewer in the church for the younger generation, especially those who are in high school right now, I think that's Gen Z. That's their question. Why are we going to church? And a lot of times it's the response is it's because it's the right thing to do. But they're not the generation to just check the box anymore. They're the generation that wants to know why something is needed in order to do it. And I think until we help them to stop just trying to see things as a box checker, yeah, I think we're going to keep struggling in the church to keep the younger generations in.
Thanks, Laura. I'm curious. I have not done a lot of study on Gen Z particularly, but it makes sense to me that they're seeking meaning. They're seeking the why underneath the obligation, underneath the dogma. After, you know, all that they've seen and lived through, why would they not? I guess I'm curious, and I don't know that you can answer this question, but I guess I'm just curious, again, trying to translate these concepts of extended cognition, extended community. Would it make sense to a Gen Zer to say, because you can't become who you want to become alone, you need to be connected to other people to become kind of this end goal of a Christian? Like, would do you think that would resonate? I'm just kind of thinking about how to translate that.
Yeah, I think it would, because they're not anti-community. I think the problem is the church has been built up, like what we're talking about, the distinction between spirit and soul and body. And a lot of churches are built up where it's leave your body at the door, leave your issues at the door, come here and get your soul filled. And from my conversations with the younger generation, they're not going to do that. So for them, they'll find community somewhere else where they can bring their whole selves and their whole bodies and all their issues and all their concerns without being shamed or judged. But if the church is a space where you can only bring your soul, they're like, oh, I'll just go somewhere else then. And they'll find their community in other places and other spaces that have nothing to do with the church or Christianity. So I think if we continue to have the conversation of bringing the two together in churches, then that can still be a safe space for them to engage fully. If that makes sense.
Preach. Well said. Yeah. Go ahead, Karen.
I have a follow-up question for you. Do you think there's any commonality between millennials, Gen Z, and cross-generationally single people?
I would say so. I would say between millennials and Gen Z, depends, because older millennials are closer to Gen Xers. So they grew up without social media. They grew up, just the way life was before. But younger millennials are closer to Gen Z, where everything is interactive and they're seeing the world differently and they have more connections with the world. So their needs are a bit different. Mm-hmm. But as far as single people, do you mean unmarried, like never married, divorced?
I realize that saying single is like, that's a little reductive, but I suppose I would go with the never married or the divorced, as opposed to the widowed or widowered group of folk. I just kind of wonder, because I see obviously a huge single demographic within the United States. In fact, I think it outpaces married at this point. And I'm not a woe is me person about that, because I am a single female and I don't intend to marry. So, but at the same token, some of the things that millennials and Gen Zers that you're saying, are questions that they have, are things I've always had. And I just kind of, wondered if there's some commonality that when you don't fit the church mold, sometimes even those puny reasons go away. Well, I go to church so that my kids will be raised up in a church, or, whatever. Well, sorry, I don't have that reason. So why would I go to church? You know what I mean? Well, to worship with other people. Nobody talks to me. I'm single. Married people don't talk to me. They have nothing in common with me. So, etc. So, that's not the way it is at my current church home, but it sure was for a pretty long time. You know what I mean? And kind of kept me from diving back into faith a little bit sooner, in my adulthood. So I guess it's just a question, Laura. You know what I mean? Whether that's actually cross-generational, depending upon your demographic.
I think absolutely, especially what you're bringing up about singleness in the church. I just had this conversation with my sister yesterday. So in my previous church, I didn't feel that way either. It was all are welcome, doesn't matter. I remember my pastor intentionally did not have a singles ministry, because he was like, I need all you guys to hang out with each other. So married people learn from single people learn from married people. Stop segregating yourselves. So he's like, we're not doing a singles ministry. But in my current church, this last week, it was more like a prayer service. And it's kind of like what you were saying, it's focused so much on couples and children. And it's interesting because the prayers were broken up into marriages, into children. And then for single people, it was about them focusing on God's purpose in their life. And my thought kept going, does that mean if you're married, you don't have a purpose from God? What is this distinction, But
well, I mean, it's funny, according to Paul, in 1 Corinthians 7, he would say that married people are more concerned with the things of the world, where the single person has, and I think, oh, okay, but that doesn't mean that, and I don't think that Paul meant that to be exclusive.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So I totally am down with what you're saying.
And
You
if
know,
you don't fit that mold of being married at a certain age,
Yep.
then most likely you're relegated to children's ministry, because apparently if you're single and you're a woman, you want to be in children's ministry, which
Of
I don't
course
know
you do,
where that
because you're
comes from.
dying to be around children 24/7 if you don't have any of your own.
Yeah, or you are the designated babysitter because you have nothing else you're doing. You know, so there are just certain molds that just automatically fits that for the church. And you're right, I have seen single people be like, I'll go find my community elsewhere where I'm not being othered because I don't have a spouse or children, or I'm not being fixed all the time, or it's not like I have this disease that needs to be cured. So yeah, there's an exodus of that too, where I feel like the church is becoming more and more a place for people who are married with children, and that's it.
Mm.
And young children. If you are in the middle, like college age, then you kind of peace out also.
Yeah, no, it's just a really interesting discussion. And again, it might be a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it, to me, it just again, circling back full circle, just what you were saying about millennials and Gen Zs and asking that question. And then I saw a thread, you know, that was a little bit, you know, cut across that demographic to a slightly different cross section. And I think that probably, you know, one could argue, well, if you're single millennial or Gen Z, you're gonna, you know what I mean, as opposed to Gen X, which I think I'm on the older end of Gen X. At being born in 1969. So I think I'm on the older cusp of that one. So
Mature. You're the mature cusp.
I'm in the mature cusp of, yes, that, absolutely.
I love this conversation. I really, I'm enjoying kind of the enthusiasm and energy, because this really touches down, right, with like our particularities in the church. And yeah, people are like, I'm not getting this in the church, I'm going to go join CrossFit. I mean, you know, we have a society that gets this desire and has created cohorts of people that meet this desire. You can find all sorts of them. And I don't mean to beat the extended cognition horse to death, but I do think that, again, going back to, I believe it was Cutter or someone said this, not all extended communities are positive, right?
Mhm.
Like we can extend a community that is normed around you need to be a parent or a child or a grandparent to fit. And that extension, that norm, won't capture those people for whom they're not going to be in the room. They're not going to come in the room. They're not going to come to church. They're going to find something else. And then, you know, this becomes this, again, sort of this weird dualistic way of thinking about being human, that is defined by family. And I don't know, I have this theory in LA, because all the things that you guys have said, I've lived and feel and know as well. LA is so hard for anyone to find community that I wonder if families band together. And I don't blame them. Like, let's find some people that we can stick with that have kids my age. Thank goodness we can have community. I sort of get that at a level. And it does norm particular ways that then the church life extends itself. And so I'm organizing a hike this weekend, and I'm inviting all people with families, kids, dogs. And I guarantee you it's going to be small compared to like some other family events, like going to the beach or whatever. I just know that that's a reality, and it's kind of a bummer. But it's hard for families to get up at Saturday morning at 9 o'clock and go on a hike. So I'm going to take my dog and we're going to go. But
I'll be there. Drive from Atlanta. It's cool.
And I don't know if it's like this in other big cities, but I was recently reflecting on why it's so hard to, one of the possible reasons why it's so hard to find community and make friends in LA. At first I thought it was a competition, and I thought more about it. And I think it's because LA is so transient and it's so temporary. Like people come here for a specific reason and then up and leave. It's almost like this isn't where you are born, you're raised, and you retire. Unlike a lot of other small towns, like people literally leave when it's time to retire. People come here for different reasons. So I think for those of us, especially who've been here a long time, I'll speak for myself. I have this mentality of this relationship is temporary. So it's only going to be a few years and then we're going to up and leave again, you know. And I think that's part of the reason why, from my observation, but I don't know if that's like that in other places.
It was in DC.
Hmm.
You know, when because there's so many government contract work, right? Like that's just a huge employer. Obviously, the government is the #1 employer in DC and Virginia, is just being some sort of, and you're not necessarily like working directly for the government. Obviously, you're a contractor, which organically means that you have a lifespan, right, of 3 to 5 years, whatever your contract might be. So I did find that in the DC area as well, just a lot of like, hey, I'm here for now, and but then who knows, and that sort of thing. I find that less so in Atlanta, even though it's just as common to find somebody who was born and raised here as somebody who's a transplant like myself. You still, like, Atlanta has this weird sticking power. A lot of people end up liking it here, for whatever their reasons might be. So I find it slightly less transient, and it does have a pretty strong church community, all things considered. But I can totally resonate with the LA, if that's what LA is like. The transient thing was definitely a factor in DC.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And you guys are pointing to what we're going to get to here in a couple weeks, which is talking about churches as systems. And churches are always embedded in a particular community, right? And so to what extent do our churches reflect the values of our community, LA being quite a transient community? So, and what, I don't know, I guess, and to what extent do we reject the values of our community if they're not good for the people in the church? So I don't know, we can take on the smell of our community, right? And in good ways and bad ways, like not smell, I don't mean smell, but like the embodiment of we can take on the essence of our communities, and that's good. Like, we want to know our communities and be responsive to our communities. However, what are the ways that our communities deform us to be able to be responsible to the people with whom we're supposed to serve, that we've been called to serve? That came out a little clumsily, but I think you guys get what I mean. So
I'm still looking forward to it. Sounds great. Church systems, got it.
Yeah. Colin, anything from you? What are you thinking?
I don't think I have a whole lot to say. I've definitely given me a lot to think about, but I don't have a whole lot to contribute.
Yeah, I'll pitch one more thought here, and then we can end for today. And this is also pointing towards the future. I said we're going to talk about churches as systems. We're also going to start thinking about the world and thinking a bit more about creation care. And I thought this was a really interesting point at the end of Dr. Strawn and Dr. Brown were talking about, which is, in my mind, when I would talk about the world, it was always kind of those out there that we either needed to pray for or send money to, or there needed to be salvation or something, that othering. And the way that they started to think about the world was really like, okay, then our churches extend themselves into the world. And so we are both extending ourselves, but also being formed by, also being connected to our world. And so they talked about it a bit like, let's not make this a really abstract concept. Let's think about our neighborhoods. Let's think about the people with whom we've been called to serve and to connect to. Let's talk about the earth and those sorts of things. So I just curious, as we kind of close out today, but just kind of bridging to the future, like, how do you think about how we extend ourselves into the world in this way that they're talking about? Any thoughts there?
The world in this way, in which way? Like the earth way, the other, the with others? Can you unpack that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what they're saying is, how do you understand, when you hear the word the world, what comes to mind? And I think what they're suggesting is, how do we think locally? But also, how do we connect globally? And then they bring in creation care. So it can go a lot of different directions. It can be both your neighborhood context of your church communities, or just where you live, if you're not in your church community, or yeah, even thinking ecologically, creation care. How do we think about the world? So very open-ended question. You can go any direction with it.
It just brought to mind I think it was Dr. Calloway that was talking about how, in his view, having an electric car would be a way of him, addressing the needs of the world in a small way. And that just set me to thinking about some of the things that, we can do in our house that would and do, improve the wider world, so to speak, and how that has an influence, but that also, like, if I'm taking care of the things, or I'm doing, what I can on a micro level to, contribute less waste or recycle, then I can also trust that there are other people and believe that there are other people in the body that are doing those same things in the way that they can, and that is the body functioning together to make the world at large a better place.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, thanks, Colin.
I mean, I think what Colin says, about doing things on a micro level, that just feels to me, like nice, healthy personal responsibility. You know what I mean? Like God or the Holy Spirit speaks into you. He says, like, hey, you're a steward of the earth, so to speak. Don't point to politicians or someone else to clean up this problem for you. What are you going to do personally, to contribute? And I think that micro thing is really super important, because other people are watching and observing, potentially, what you do, even if you don't think they might be, doing that. As an example, with, a compost service that's here in the area now, Compost Now. I think that I got like 4 other people hooked on it. I said nothing to them. My bin sits outside, that's all. So I think that, that it is really, it's a lot more important than we give it credit to, just taking that personal responsibility. So I think, Colin, what you say there is pretty darn important. I think, for me, the outward othering, like, a lot more visible in the community, or, a cooperative or collaborative effort is really, really important as well. But I personally struggle with the, a little bit with the, how do you want to say, the do-gooder kind of, component of that, because I actually don't like that at all. You know what I mean? I would rather quietly go along, and I don't know whether that's wrong or not, but it is sort of a preference.
When you say do-gooder, I'm just curious, and I don't have a right or wrong valence here. I'm just curious what does that mean for you?
The sort of, like, if we take mission by eras, in other words, and we always like had this, era of mission where we went out to, the folks that had never heard the gospel, or the, unreached, the unchurched, whatever, and they weren't here in the US, as an example. They were always somewhere else. We were going off, to minister to others. It's that's like it's cool and everything, sometimes, obviously, I think there is a time and a place to go, out, but I'm questioning that a little bit more than I used to do. And I'm not sure why. I haven't sorted it out entirely, but, yeah, that's all I've got. I'm just sorting that, because you had said the other, sort of the outward, and I admit that I sort of struggle with my role in that part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. Yeah. Laura, any other thoughts from you? I'm happy to kind of wrap things up here. Just wanted to check in, see if you had anything else.
Nothing else. Good conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say thanks for the kind of this last bit of thought here. I do think there's levels again, right? We can think about caring for our neighbor and creation care individually. We can think about how that works itself out in a church community. And then we can think about how it extends into the world. And so I think that's where we're going. I think that's what we're going to think through and think forward about. So more conversation on that to come. Thank you all for being here. I'm really appreciative of, okay, that was Paul's question. Really appreciative of this conversation. Feel free to email me if you have any questions as we move forward in the week. And I hope you guys all have a great evening.
Thanks. You too. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Take care.
guys.
Have fun with your puppy. Bye.
Thank you.